Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this episode of the show about the show. This is episode 35. Today, just like every day, is Rusev Day, so a happy Rusev Day to you all. I have one of my absolute all-time favorite guests on this show. He is a world-famous artist and a giant baseball fan, to say the very least. He has agreed to come on and talk everything baseball, art, paintings, whatnot for the next 45 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Graig Kriendler, thank you very much for coming on today, Greg. How you doing?
Not too bad, Devlin. How about yourself?
Doing well. Let's
Awesome.
talk a
Thanks
little
for
bit.
having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I'm very excited. So you're a painter and an illustrator. You grew up in Rockland County, New York, and your relationship with baseball began at a very early age. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah. Well, basically, like most, I guess, kids who get into baseball, it kind of starts with their parents in some way. And it did so with me. I kind of got into the game because of my father, who was and still is a very big Yankee fan. And as a result, my older brother also was a Yankee fan, and then I became a Yankee fan. And my mother, who was actually a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, I have no idea how they got together to this date because of that. Somehow, we would all like go to games together. Not like super regularly, but a couple times a year we would go to a game. And it was just kind of through that I got into the sport. I did Little League, and my father had a baseball card collection, which I guess played a big role in what it is that I do now, and that's kind of like the bare bones of it. My life as a kid, as like a 7-8-year-old or whatever, is just very much filled with baseball.
And you kind of became fascinated with your family's history with the sport, and you correctly say that no other sport embodies the relationship between generations and the sense of community like baseball. What do you think it is, Greg, that ties so many people back to those memories of growing up? Whether it's something like Field of Dreams, like just having a catch with your dad, or like your dad's baseball card collection, and your mom going to games. What do you think it is about baseball and family that kind of goes together?
That's a great question. You know what? I don't really know. I can kind of guess. The fact that you don't really need much to play really helps, I think. You need a bat and a ball. And, a bat doesn't have to be a bat that a major leaguer uses. A ball doesn't have to be a ball that a major leaguer uses. You don't necessarily need to have a glove. I just think, it's a very portable game. It's not like hockey. It's not like football. It doesn't require a large investment, financially speaking. So I think that kind of makes it a bit easier to play than some of those other sports. But I just the way that it kind of grabs hold of the country and did grab hold of the country, I don't know. It's like I don't really know exactly like what the X factor was, but it kind of feels like it hasn't really changed, you know, like it's still, you still think of the game in those same terms, even though, you know, almost 200 years later from, I guess it's one of its origin points, it's a very different game, but at the same time, it's still very much the same. It's, I don't know. I don't even know if I'm making much sense what I'm saying, but, it's such an interesting game in that sense. It doesn't really, you don't really get that kind of feeling, that sense with the other sports, even though those other sports are just as, you know, storied and historical. It's just different with baseball, I guess.
I agree, and you know, I think a couple factors play into it, and what you said there was absolutely correct. I think one thing too, a couple factors that play in is, one, I think the fact that it's played in the spring and the summer is really helpful because it allows more kids to get involved in the game. You know, obviously, your spring and summer, they're starting to get done with school, and they're looking forward to the summer, and a lot of kids have the summer off, so they can go to baseball games. They can do those kind of things, and they can be outside and all that kind of stuff. And then I think another thing, too, about it is baseball allows us, because of the fact that it doesn't have a clock, you're not racing against the clock. There's no putting up the last shot or throwing a Hail Mary or whatever, or no shootout. You can allow yourself over the course of a 3-hour game to become emotionally invested in it, to have a conversation with the person sitting next to you, to be able to reminisce about that play that you saw, you know, 2 years ago or 5 years ago, or you know, that player that you always remember. I think that's partly what helps bridge that gap between generations, and like you said in that quote, you know, between the generations and the sense of community like baseball.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're totally right, and it's interesting because you're not up against the clock, and I think there are some people who think that kind of makes baseball boring, but you know, some of that tension that builds between pitches, it's like there's nothing like that. You know, it's the most exciting sport that you could ever watch or be a part of.
Absolutely. And you know, like you said, you know, that moment in between a pitch and the time the batter hits it or swings, I mean, it's just as exciting as a heavyweight boxing fight or a Hail Mary or anything. I mean, to me, I still think a walk-off home run or a walk-off hit is the most exciting thing in sports, to me. I mean, anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely right up there. I mean, there's a certain amount of I don't know if pomp and circumstance is the right phrase, but there's something very theatrical about it. Yeah, yes. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now you've actually won a lot of awards for your work. I'm not going to list all of them because this is only a 45-minute episode, but some of them include the Norman Rockwell Museum Award. Now, that had to have been pretty cool. You know, Norman Rockwell, for me, is Americana, and especially with his baseball scenes. You know, you got the umpires in the rain and so many other things. What was it like, you know, being an artist of the national pastime and then getting an award from somebody whose work is so you know, in touch with America and is kind of considered Americana, and the game that you draw about is too. What was that like to get that Norman Rockwell Museum Award?
That was pretty special. It happened. Wow, it happened a long time ago now. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was kind of right in my last year of college, and it was. I can't remember if it was for a student show or if it was for a professional show at the Society of Illustrators, but it was just amazing nonetheless, because Rockwell has kind of always been a hero of mine. like you said, I mean, there's not much. There's not anything that seems more quote unquote American than Norman Rockwell, and aside from the sentiment that he's able to kind of create with his artwork, I think just kind of technically speaking, the kind of painter that he was, the way he would compose and design a picture, his ability to tell stories, like he was second to none. He was just an absolute god. So I kind of, I was, absolutely just gobsmacked that they gave me that award. I kind of thought it was a mistake because what are you talking about? Who am I?
Right.
I'm not even,
right.
I shouldn't be mentioned in the same breath as this guy. And I guess I really wasn't, but it was just a really amazing feeling. And it's just kind of like a highlight that I can come back to and always, bring a smile to my face with.
Absolutely. So in addition to the Norman Rockwell Museum Award, you've also won the Illustration Academy Award from the Society of Illustrators. You've been featured in nationally distributed books, newspapers, and magazines, as well as the New York Times, FoxNews.com, the Wall Street Journal, the Sporting News, and the Yes Network. You also have original works, and we were talking about this before the podcast started. You have original works in the Yogi Berra Museum, and you had one in the Bob Feller Museum, as well as the National Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. Talk about how cool that is.
All of those paintings and those kind of like events were incredibly cool. I mean, especially the Yogi Berra and the Bob Feller stuff, because I actually got to meet both Yogi and Bob, obviously before they passed away. It was like the first one that I think, the first museum that I had gotten into was the Bob Feller one. And I had, worked on the painting over the course of a couple months. And I think I spend a lot of time researching my subjects, and I get really, anal with getting things kind of historically accurate, whether that's, not only the look of like a player and the uniform that he's wearing, but also the look of the ballpark and like the time of day that, the particular moment is happening, what the quality of light was, what the weather's like all that stuff. I try to really get perfect and as true to life as possible. So I did that with this painting for the Feller Museum, and I eventually, I got to meet Bob. It was the summer of 2009, just a few years before he passed, and it was at the National Sports Collectors Convention in Cleveland, and I'm taken behind like this tarp where my painting is kind of set up on an easel, and people are kind of getting ready, like athletes are getting ready to kind of sign autographs to the masses. And Bob comes in and he looks at the painting, and he's staring at it, and he's not saying anything. And I'm like, oh my God, does he hate it? He hates it. This is awful. This is a huge mistake. And eventually like comes out of his, his silence saying, well, that's, and he kind of stumbles a little bit. That's the best damn painting I've ever seen. And I'm like, oh my God. And I basically was kind of like jumping for joy in my heart at that point. But he said that like I had gotten everything about it right, and that, that it felt like that day, like he was actually transported back to that day, he told me. And, it was like this cold, overcast day. The painting was of him throwing his opening day no-hitter in 1940 in Chicago. And it was this cold day at Comiskey Park, and not many people were there. And he's like, yeah, this is it. This is the day. This is what it felt like. It was really cold. And he's kind of like going over each and every detail of the game, kind of like he just experienced it the day before because he was just so whip smart and quick. And the fact that he thought that I nailed it, I mean, I still to this day, you know, I think about that and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that he responded so positively to it. It was just amazing.
Now, I'd be really interested to hear what Yogi thought about the painting you did of him, because, you know, Yogi's known for his yogi-isms, and I want to hear that story. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Unfortunately, it's not as exciting. I'd gone to the museum and presented the painting, and he was there with the director of the museum at the time, David Kaplan, and kind of presented the painting to him, and we posed for a few photographs. And Yogi, you know, he looked at the painting and he seemed to like it, but he didn't make too many remarks. He was a very quiet kind of guy. He seemed very reserved, and you know, I don't know if he's normally like that, or you know, whether he's like that with some people, or maybe he just didn't feel like, you know, I guess becoming that yogi persona or whatever. But it was just kind of cool to see him in that way. And I guess such a different way that everybody is so used to seeing him, you know, because I guess when you think of him, you really do think of all of those great yogi quotes, and you think of him as a baseball player. And to me, it was just kind of like he was just this older gentleman who was, you know, really sweet and quiet and grateful. And that was, you know, it was touching. It was not really what I expected from him, but still very touching.
That's a great moment. And you know, one of the other things that you've been one of the other awards that you've gotten is you're in the National Jewish Sports Hall of Fame and Museum. Now, you know, I have to think that you know, probably being in the Hall of Fame for your ethnicity or religion or whatever you want to say is probably got to be the biggest thrill for you, on top, even, you know, more so than being in the Bob Feller and Yogi Berra Museum.
Yeah, I mean, that was really amazing too. I mean, the museum itself, you know, focused on basically Jewish athletes throughout history, and I don't know if this was if it was a painting that they bought because they were putting together a show, or whether it was for their you know, their private or public collection or permanent collection or whatever. But the guy who purchased it, who worked at the museum, I think he was the director at the time, he was also just really into my work, which I was really appreciative of, and he had purchased, it was a painting of Sandy Koufax. It was actually one that I posted on Facebook and Twitter maybe a day or two ago. Oh, it was actually yesterday. It was his third career no-hitter, one against the Phillies from 1964, and it's this painting of him in front of this lit scoreboard, and you see kind of all these glowing lights behind him. And the guy fell in love with the piece and purchased it for the museum. But I don't think he owns it anymore. I don't think the museum owns it anymore, because I think they actually sold off a number of their assets for one reason or another. But either way, you know, just being in there, even if it was just kind of like a temporary thing, was pretty awesome.
Now, one of the hardest things I would imagine about being an artist is taking a picture that was black and white and painting a color painting of it. Can you talk about how you go from taking a black and white photo into the color and making it come alive the way that your fans get to see it?
Yeah. Well, it's hard. It's basically there was no roadmap that I followed to do things, I guess, the way that I do them now. And I, whether I do them right or wrong, I don't know. But I basically, when I was in school, when I was in college, the School of Visual Arts, I spent a lot of time working on paintings of like models from life. So I was kind of observing everything that way. I was kind of painting models from life and painting landscapes and just kind of observing nature and trying to really pay attention to what, I guess, nature and what light did to things like color and value, how it affected those things, and how I could kind of manipulate that and try to pull off certain illusions in my paintings. And back then, I wasn't doing it because I was going to be this guy who was focusing on baseball art. I was basically I was learning. This is kind of like what I thought I had to do, or what I was supposed to do good paintings of whatever kind of whatever, I guess, subject matter I was going to tackle. Because at the time, I still, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I wasn't gunning to be this guy who was just painting baseball-related stuff. So when I discovered the baseball stuff, or rediscovered it, I guess in my case, I guess I just got really into the idea of painting not only players from the history of the game, but kind of trying to bring them to life and put them in color, because it kind of occurred to me that most of the people at that point, this is the very early 2000s, most of the people who had seen Babe Ruth play in person were probably pretty old, or maybe not even alive. So seeing him, or seeing like Lou Gehrig in color, seeing them in the flesh was just this idea that really appealed to me. And I kind of took it and ran with it, I guess. And I tried to kind of take what I learned in school about, painting from life and observing nature and observing light and color. And I tried to kind of, imbue that into the work that I was doing, with these baseball guys. And it's still, it's still kind of like an ongoing process where I'm learning new things with each painting, or I'm learning new things as I observe more, or if I go to museums and I get to see other people's work and how they handle kind of similar motifs. It's just always a learning process.
And when you talk about bringing those things to life, you're kind of a visual historian, aren't you?
Yeah, I try to be. Yeah, very much. It's just like, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, just being a visual historian, kind of recreating history that you may not have experienced, but other people have, or that they can maintain a connection with, things like that. That people who, like you said, may not have been around to see, or may have been around to see Babe Ruth, who aren't alive anymore, they can see that picture and go, that's what it was like, or
right.
Oh yeah, that's what Mickey Mantle looked like when he swung a bat.
Right. Yeah, that to me was just super important. Still is super important, and I try not to kind of, I guess, I don't know what the phrase is. I try not to glorify these guys. Like I try not, like, I try to portray them, you know, as they were. And I don't really try to make them seem, you know, ultra heroic or anything like that. It's just, I try to act like a reporter in that sense, you know, like here's what it looked like. This is what happened. And same with even like the subject matter, you know, if I'm painting, I'd gotten questions a few times before about painting people like Ty Cobb or Cap Anson, you know, because they were, you know, known racists or supposed racists. And, you know, did I ever have any problems with painting those guys or anything like that? And I would say that I put those kind of personal opinions and notions aside, and I just try to report. You know, I kind of say, this is what it was, this is what happened, this is who these people were, and, you know, you leave the rest up to the audience.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think makes your paintings so popular is that you get the small things right. Your attention to detail is unlike anybody else, I think, currently in the country that does what you do in terms of baseball park You're welcome. In terms of ballpark advertisements or style of the uniform, or like you mentioned earlier, weather conditions. You know, you mentioned Bob Feller saying, yeah, it was an overcast day. What is it about the little details like that, or maybe, you know, faces in the crowd, or somebody putting their hands up in the crowd and cheering? What is it about details like that bring your portrait to life, kind of more so than the subject? Maybe the small details.
You know, I don't know. I think I've just kind of always been attracted to, you know, forgive the phrase, but, you know, painting the full picture, you know, and
Sure.
I really think that when I'm painting these guys, that it's important to put them, you know, in their proper historical context. I remember, like, I did a painting for a client of Lou Gehrig, and it was a painting of him hitting his last career home run. And it was at Yankee Stadium, and the image was kind of from behind home plate, so you could see the outfield. And in the outfield, in the stands, you know, you could see people, you know, in the crowd, and it was kind of a sparsely attended game. It was late in the season. It was against the Senators, and by that time the Yankees had already clinched the pennant. So, you know, there wasn't necessarily a huge reason for it to be a crowded game, especially when you're playing someone like the Senators. But anyway, I'm painting, you know, some of the people in the crowd in the back, and I did research and was like, you know, what kind of baseball fan was sitting in the bleachers at Yankee Stadium in that era? And by that, you know, I mean kind of not only kind of like socioeconomic, but, you know, at that point, you know, ballparks were kind of, some of them were segregated. And it turns out that I think, I don't remember exactly how this played out because it's been a few years since I did the painting, but Yankee Stadium was at some point, I don't know if it was deemed segregated, but I think for the most part, I think a lot of African-American fans would sit in the bleachers in the outfield. And so, you know, I kind of like tried to make sure that a lot of the fans that I painted in that painting were African-American. And it's just, it was important for me to get a detail like that right, because that was the tenet of the country, you know, that was the climate. And that's kind of what the reality was, as you know, sad and appalling as that is now. That's what things were like.
in 2012, something kind of cool happened to you. The United States Postal Service issued a softbound book called Play Ball. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, the post office has kind of had a tradition with honoring baseball players and the game for at least, the past 20, 30 years. And they approached me, or I guess they approached my agent, really. And they were putting together this book that was a celebration of that, which would include all of the stamps that they had done over the past couple of decades, the stamps that were baseball themed. And
Sure.
They really seemed to dig my work, and they just they wanted to use it as, I guess, a means to telling their story and telling kind of the story of baseball to augment the stamps that they included with the book. So the book came out, and it was weird because I could tell people, oh, well, you could go to the post office and you could get a book with my stuff in it, which is still, thinking back on it, is incredible. And yeah, I was honored to be kind of a part of that, and honored to be recognized by the Postal Service, and honored that they liked my work enough to include it in a project that was so big.
Now, do you have a favorite baseball painting that you've done? I mean, you've done probably hundreds, if not thousands, of paintings. Do you have one that kind of sticks out to you that you're most proud of?
It's hard to pick a favorite. Kind of like picking a favorite child, which now that I have two children, I kind of know what that's like. But lately I've had a lot of affinity for a painting that I finished about a year and a half ago of it was a team painting of the 1927 Yankees. That was just a huge monumental undertaking, and I think that one is one that really tugs on my heartstrings pretty hard. Sure.
Now, if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, let's say somebody's listening to this interview and they go, "Wow, this guy sounds amazing. I want him to paint a player or an image from baseball for me." How do they do that? How do they get in contact with you?
Well, they basically, what they could do is they can contact me through Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and that will actually put you in contact directly with me because I manage those accounts myself. My website is just a little bit different because that's mostly managed by my agent, who is, I guess, a representative of me. So I guess you would still kind of be talking to me, but you can reach me through any of those platforms. And if anyone was interested in commissioning something or purchasing something, or even just talking and, telling me a story or something like that, then they are certainly free to do so. And I love hearing from everyone, even if it's someone to tell me that I did something wrong and they think that something is off. I love hearing from people who are affected by my stuff in some way, even if it's in a not so positive way. Thankfully, those don't happen often, but you never know, because sometimes they do.
Absolutely. We've got about 10 minutes left. It seems like a lot of your paintings, which I personally love, are vintage. A lot of them are like, I guess, pre-1960. Do you think it's just because baseball had more characters back then, kind of more more people that baseball could latch on to, and baseball was just kind of a more popular game back then than it is now. Do you think that that's why kind of some of those images and players kind of are more iconic than maybe some of the images today?
You know what? I think it's because of a couple of reasons. I think that that's part of it. I also think that the way that you and I kind of see baseball now is it's just a very different. We experience that sport in a very different way than say our parents did. We can watch a game in person. We can watch a game on television. We can watch a game on our phones, on the computer, on an iPad, on many different ways. And back then, basically you're going to the ballpark, or you're listening on radio, or you're watching it on television, and you weren't seeing every play in 37,000 different angles. You kind of have 2 or 3 main angles that you're seeing action happen throughout a particular game. That is, if you're watching it on television. Now
Absolutely.
you have, instant replay, and, there are cameras in every part of the ballpark, and it's kind of like, I think players and scenes in the game of that era, I think that there's a bit more mystery to it, in that there are certain parts of it that are still kind of fuzzy in our minds, because it was experienced in a different way. You're exposed to these players in a different way. You're growing up and watching these players in a different way, and not necessarily a better way, but I think that in a way that makes them a bit more completely nothing but references, but I realize I've been doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the good example of the mystique and the aura that you were kind of talking about, or the mystery, I think a good example of that is the called shot from Babe Ruth in the 32 World Series. He said, people asked him if he actually did it, and he said, well, check the papers. It's in the papers, isn't it? Well, and the Cubs pitcher, Charlie Root, swore that he wouldn't have done it, and he basically said if he had, I would have knocked him on his butt. So,
right.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. There is kind of an aura of, mystery, and the people that were there got to experience that more. And I think that's kind of what makes those images special, is that it wasn't being broadcast worldwide to 20 million people across the internet. It was the 40,000 fans in the stadium, and then maybe people listening at home. Right,
exactly. And can you imagine, we were talking about this before, but your favorite moment with the Puckett home run. Can you imagine experiencing that, at a ballpark in, say, like the 40s? I mean, you personally would have had to have been there for the most part. You most likely wouldn't have seen it on television. And even at the ballpark, it probably just would have been this completely different thing, because, you're just watching the game. You have no idea what's going on outside of the game. You're not, you're watching the game in a completely different way. The tension is mounting differently. It would have been a totally different experience. And it's amazing that time really affects that stuff the way it does. But yeah, can you imagine, if somebody called their shot in a World Series now, how ridiculously that would be covered on, I was going to say ESPN, that the next, it would be instantly. You'd be hearing about it on Twitter. You'd see photographs of it on Twitter. It's just, you would have such a weird time.
People live tweeting about it. Yeah, exactly. You would have people live tweeting about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Graig, we've got about 5 minutes left. Can you just kind of talk to me a little bit about? So one of the things that I really love about your work, in addition to the many things, is that you paint all aspects of baseball. You don't just paint the major leagues. You're pretty well known for your paintings of the Negro Leagues as well. Can you talk about what it's like painting Negro League players?
Yeah, I love painting the Negro Leaguers. It's a totally challenge to paint some of those guys. And that, I mean that kind of in every way. Mainly it's a joy to kind of do research and learn about these guys myself. People who I wouldn't have heard of otherwise, and try to kind of do a painting of them that is hopefully historically accurate, and to kind of put it out there and have people, I guess, learn about these guys for the first time, kind of like in the same way that I am. It's almost like I'm if it's a commission that I'm doing of a Negro Leaguer, it's almost like I'm being paid to get an education, and it's a lot harder to kind of do research for those guys and those leagues, because they weren't covered in the same way that the white leagues were covered, and you have very few surviving newspapers that actually had coverage of the Negro Leagues, because for the most part, the bigger newspapers, the New York Times, the Daily Newses of the world, they didn't really cover the Negro Leagues. So you had a lot of the ball players, you had a lot of the newspapers that were focused just on kind of African American issues that were following those clubs and doing stories on them and box scores and whatever. And unfortunately, you can't go to a library and look up microfilm on those newspapers. They just don't exist. So you have these, disparate pieces of information that you're just trying to put together in every which way possible in order to come up with a painting that is somewhat historically accurate. And you kind of end up, or I end up, guessing a lot of the time. And it's nerve-wracking in that sense, but it's also incredibly fulfilling, because you kind of feel like you're giving these players an opportunity to kind of be discovered. People who have kind of been forgotten for a reason that, doesn't even go beyond the color of their skin. It's just, it's a shame, and it's a shame that that's how it is. But I'm honored to be able to try and bring them back to light.
We got about 30 seconds left. I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds to kind of promote anything that you're working on. Tell everybody listening what your Facebook is, your Twitter, your website, anything you want to promote. The last 90 seconds are yours.
Oh, sure. Thanks. I guess rather than talking about anything specific project-wise, I can just say, come check me out on Twitter. You can, find me at twitter.com /Graig Kriendler, which is just, my name, Graig Kriendler. Same goes to GraigKriendler.com, and same on Instagram, I guess, Instagram.com /Graig Kriendler. You can find me and you can check out what I'm doing, and you can drop me an email. You can tell me I stink or whatever you want. I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to get in touch for any reason.
Graig, I cannot thank you enough for giving me 45 minutes out of your day to come on my podcast and talk about your fantastic and amazing work. I wish you nothing but the best, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's been my pleasure.
No, it's been my pleasure too, Devlin. I appreciate it, and I'm glad we could finally hook up.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch in the near future. Take care.
All right, thanks, Devlin. You too. Take care.
You're welcome. You too. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Graig Kriendler. He is a world-famous baseball artist. He has pictures up in the Yogi Berra Museum. He is well-regarded and very renowned. Like he said, find him on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at Graig Kriendler. That's GraigKriendler. That's all I've got for today and this week. I will hopefully be posting more next week. I just want to say that make sure that you're spending time with those you love. If you're a parent, make sure you give your kids hugs and kisses and love, because we never know how much time we have here on Earth. And as my baseball hero Kirby Puckett once said, nobody's promised tomorrow. Nobody's guaranteed a tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I've got today, and we'll see you down on the road in podcast land. Thanks for joining me.